You're listening in on an animated discussion about Superman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Superman the Animated Series episode, Fun and Games. Oh boy, Joshua, I feel kind of icky after watching this. Why? This was the first episode after the pilot. I feel icky already. Oof.
Icky? Interesting. Is it because you're reading a lot into the Toyman?
Yeah, but like the way they portray him, I feel like it leaves that door wide open. And I mean, I think he's supposed to be creepy. The icky comes into play when I start thinking about why I think it's creepy, because then I start thinking about stuff like pedophilia, and I'm like, oh, no, gross.
Well, you're not alone. DC Comics also had thoughts in that direction, but we'll talk about that more as we go. So let's kick it off. The first big design that we get in this episode as far as characters go is Toyman. I mean, we get one other guy I want to talk about, but he's nowhere near as important as Toyman. So let's talk about Toyman. I think that there are a lot of very wise decisions going on in this design because he's the friggin' Toyman, right? Like, let me just lay this out there so people can get ready for when this comes up as we watch Superman, the animated series. Almost every superhero's rogues gallery is garbage. Almost every one of them. There are like 3 good ones. That's it. Superman is not one of those 3. Which is not to say that he doesn't have good villains. He has 1 or 2. But the gallery as a whole, garbage. And Toyman is a fine example of this because he's the friggin' Toyman and this is Superman. Tell me Toyman doesn't belong in Gotham City.
Oh, no, he totally does. I've actually always thought that was a bit of a strange fit. He even has like the whole psychological trauma thing that a lot of Batman villains have going for him.
That's pretty new for Superman the Animated Series. Well, depending on which era you're reading from the comics. But yeah, he just feels like a better Batman fit as far as villains go. Not the least of which because almost nothing he does is something a fellow like Superman with the Kryptonian suite of powers couldn't handle in about 3 seconds.
Oh, you know? Most definitely. I mean, he doesn't have superpowers in any capacity. He just has a lot of really cool inventions. I also quite like this design. I love the decision to cover his face behind a mask that is always smiling. That's the part that's creepy. You don't know. His voice is very effeminate, which goes both ways. I think that's a strength, but it also kind of leaves the door open for like some, like, what does he look like under there? Like, what is this guy's personality outside of this like outfit that he's got on?
Well, he's also very small, like
yes.
Physically very small. So it makes you wonder, is he an adult? Is he an adult who has some form of, dwarfism? Are we kind of looking like the baby doll, to borrow from Batman the Animated Series? Is it a robot that he's controlling? Like, it's wide open and it just adds to the creep factor.
Yes, 100%. But yes, I think there are a lot of designs of Toyman I've seen out there, Joshua, and honestly, I would say 9 out of 10 of them are not very good. This one, I think, is pretty good, given the circumstances. Again, I think it is, to your point, very strange that Superman could be beaten by a bouncy ball or a robotic duck, but, hey.
Okay, wait. Now, I'm going to say, Toyman should not be a massive threat to Superman at all. Okay, let's say that a different way, because you can do whatever you want in fiction, right? You should put the work in. And the thing that I really liked about the bouncing ball is, first of all, he did not intend for it to deal with Superman. It was not a Superman level thing.
Right.
We're kind of getting into the episode now, but I feel like it's part of the discussion about Toyman's design is like, how does he threaten Metropolis, And for my money, I want it to be extremely ridiculous and extremely dangerous.
Yes.
And the few things that we see in this episode, I think really do that. And the ball is actually really chilling and like on its own merits. Like it's this rubber ball that starts bouncing around hard enough to, dent steel, solid steel, and even staggers Superman, you know? I really like that. I mean, speaking for myself, I like that. But also, once Superman decides he's done with it, it's done. That is as it should be. And the giant robot duck is kind of in that area. It's a big ducky. Wah! It's ridiculous.
Right.
But because it's a big titanium robot with missiles, it takes Superman a few minutes, you know?
Right.
It's not the greatest idea ever. They are definitely trying to make a silk purse out of this sow's ear, this character that they inherited from 1943. But I think they do it. I think they do it largely.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I think one way they do that actually is doing what is somewhat tropish, but when done effectively, I think is a great way to explore Superman's weaknesses, which is kidnapping Lois Lane. Now, obviously that's a thing that's going to happen way too many times, and it's kind of annoying. However, I think the one of the things about Superman is outside of kryptonite, yeah, he's pretty much invulnerable, but it is the challenges that the villains and the problems the villains create in the lives of the people he cares the most about that creates that tension. I don't know. I thought that this one was again creepy, effective use of the kidnapping trope that we'll see more of in the future.
Yeah, damseling Lois Lane is a problem, but at the same time, whenever I hear people saying, I hear this way too often, that Superman is a boring character because he's too powerful, I'm like, don't give him heavier stuff to lift. Right. That's not where his vulnerability is. Right. And while technically his vulnerability is kryptonite, that's not really his character vulnerability either. This is a man who wants to save everybody, and he can't. And I really actually think putting cities or large groups of people in danger is more effective than his friends, honestly.
Sure.
But which is good, because at a certain point we should stop damseling Lois Lane, and we never really do. Well, we never really stop.
What I'll say here, that it makes sense in the script too. Okay.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. Lois Lane upsets him. Right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Well, and he's not some like world domination villain, like where he's like Lois Lane is very much within his like realm of priority. Like, I'm trying to terrorize this guy. Oh, Lois Lane's writing nasty, untrue things about me. I want to kidnap her. Versus, Brainiac or Darkseid or something. They wouldn't even bother with Lois Lane, right?
True.
Versus here, where it feels a lot more kind of in that street level vibe that I think. I mean, again, it is a trope. We are going to see it too much, but I thought it was well written here.
Yeah, now that's a lot about the show. So let's talk about the guy that Toyman is trying to kill, because we also get the first look at Bruno Mannheim.
Bruno Mannheim, which I didn't recall. This is a guy we'll see more of in the future, I do believe, without jumping ahead.
We will see him a lot. And anyone who knows a little bit about Jack Kirby's Fourth World heard the name Bruno Mannheim and instantly knew that we were going to get some Fourth World stuff later. Like, that is literally his job, is to kind of be a conduit through which to bring Fourth World stuff to Metropolis at first.
I think that's really, again, I don't want to jump ahead. I'm going to focus on the character design here, but I do think just what very smartly they place a lot of these seeds super early in the series where it's going to go in the next 3 or 4 years. So, but no, Bruno Mannheim design, I do love kind of that more classic mobster vibe that we get from them. Again, feels vaguely Gothamish, but putting the context in Metropolis versus Gotham, I think, does help, again, highlight the differences between the world that Superman is playing in versus the world Batman's playing in.
Absolutely. And it's not immediately obvious right now that we see him, but we will see both Mannheim and Intergang be a much more Superman style problem very shortly. So right now, I think we are supposed to underestimate the threats of Metropolis a little bit. We started talking about the designs of this show mainly in terms of visuals, but I think in terms of Superman, where they're laying a lot of the groundwork, some of these character choices are also like narratively designed or story designed, and Mannheim does at first blush feel a little more Gotham, but we will not get very far down the road and we will go, oh, Intergang is a Superman problem after all. Good to know. One piece of comic book trivia, I'm not sure they do this in the show, in the cartoon. But in the comics, Bruno's nickname is Ugly. Like, he is literally Bruno, scare quotes, Ugly Mannheim. And I feel like they got it worked out with the look of this guy in the show.
Yeah, he just looks slimy, man. And he sounds slimy, too. Yeah. Well, I think, Joshua, we had one other character related to Bruno Mannheim that we are going to talk about today, and that is Spider, who is who shows up just for the first 5 minutes, but he made it a very good impression.
He made a real impression on me to the point where I don't remember if we see Spider more throughout this show, but I'm going to be keeping an eye out, because something I think we've noticed looking at World's Finest and Last Son of Krypton and even Holiday Nights is that the characters that we're not going to see very much usually get no love. Like, they are the most generic. I mean, even characters that are important, but we're not going to see them very often, like Teenage Clark or Clark Undercover, they just aren't going to get any love. And so it was so interesting that they got a real look for Spider and also some lines for Spider and a voice actor that isn't brilliant, but I think did stand out. What did you think? I know I kind of pushed talking about Spider, but what thoughts have you?
I just thought the playful, kind of the verbal jousting he was having with Lois Lane was very fun. I that's about all I got. He did feel different than just a street thug, because they easily could have written that to be just generic thug says something about my name, but they gave him a playful kind of banter with her that made it a little more engaging. And I don't know. And again, we'll see where it goes. Is this a guy who's going to pop up a couple more times, or is this just meant to highlight Lois Lane's, how she talks with the criminal underworld for, inside scoops?
Well, she's not afraid to report on that and ask for quotes, and Spider acted like they had interacted before, which is kind of cool. And, gave her a very obviously pat, not entirely true answer about being an independent contractor. So it may just be me. Listeners, I'm interested. Did Spider stand out for you? Am I pushing a personal agenda? But it's just a lot of these background players have been so lackluster that I was like, okay, now I'm going to pay attention and see if Spider keeps showing up.
Yeah. We're gonna keep a tally running. Now, Joshua.
Spider sightings.
Are spider senses tingling?
Ooh.
There we go. Well, Joshua, hey, before we get into the episode, I'm gonna pitch this to you on the air, at least as a potential recurring segment. What do we think about doing a weekly check-in with Superman's power levels? Because I think that one thing that's fun about this show is, unlike other iterations where he's basically invincible, we see him get knocked around a little bit in the cartoon. I don't think it's super consistent as far as when they what his power levels are. But I just thought it would be fun to know what hurt him this week, or how strong are we looking at Superman? Because last week we saw him. Initially, not last week, when we talked about Last Son of Krypton, we saw him getting beat up by missiles only for halfway through the fight to realize, oh, wait, these don't actually hurt me that much.
Yeah.
So for this week, for example, he's, more powerful than a moving locomotive, but he gets stopped by the goop, the Toyman goop. So you're like, oh no, how will he think his way out of this one? Which again, I think this touches on what makes Superman fun, is the wild ways he comes up with solving problems sometimes. How he's able to use his powers in a way you wouldn't expect. So I thought it was kind of hysterical that he did this spinning tornado move to show kind of shake the goop off.
I thought that was really great for exactly what you're saying. Most of the time, he can lift or punch his way out of a problem. In real trouble, he can heat vision his way out of a problem. But the Toyman actually came up with something that looked like a toy that is also not something he can just lift, punch, or laser. How do you get it off? Moving very quickly in centrifugal force. I'm a big fan of that. I do think keeping an eye on Superman's power level over the course of the DCAU as a whole is a really interesting thing to do, because I know it goes up during Superman the Animated Series, partly because remember how much they owe to John Byrne's Man of Steel reboot from the comics in 1985. They owe a lot to that. And part of that reboot was to depower Superman significantly from his Silver Age, I'm going to tow planets around on a chain level, to something still very powerful, but much more manageable. And they owe a lot to that. But then when we start to see some of those larger cosmic level threats, his power levels seem to come up, and we will discuss how they kind of tank into the ground for the first season of Justice League. Before bouncing back. That's a good thing. Let's keep an eye on that because it will fluctuate more or less with purpose, I think, even if they overcorrect sometimes.
For sure. And so just the two notes I have, of course, like I said, this is the first use of the tornado spin move thing.
I love it.
The other thing, just as far as like things that impact Superman, and it's a little hard to measure, but we mentioned earlier, the bouncy ball of death was able to knock him around. So I don't know what that thing was made of, but it was strong enough to put a hurting on Superman before he was able to thunderclap it to dust.
Yeah, I actually like that rocked him a little bit because clearly it's moving very fast. And when you get sucker punched, even if it's by someone who would not normally be able to knock you out or something, when you get sucker punched, you're not expecting it. It's a real surprise. And people who are maybe not as good a fighter or not as strong as you are can make a lot of hay with a sucker punch. And but let me say, I had a moment where I understood afresh the attraction of the Superman fantasy in terms of that bouncing ball. I just had a moment because he flies in so confident in the outfit,
right.
This ridiculous outfit that can only mean I am this confident, and he flies into this intensely dangerous situation. Those men were going to die. And frankly, they were going to die horribly.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely.
And it takes him a second to kind of get his feet under him. But then he just reaches out with this casual but compassionate show of raw power and just ends the problem. And I was like, that is the entire fantasy of Superman. That I would be in deep, life-threatening danger, and that someone for whom it is no problem to handle that danger would show up and do it just because they care about me. Right? Because they care about everybody.
Right. Well, and these are thugs, people who are breaking the law. They just robbed a bank, or they robbed something, I guess I should say. I think that's a good point to highlight, that it doesn't matter who these people are. Superman's here to save the day. And he has no problem stopping the bouncing ball. Like, as a person being rescued, I think, again, just kind of lifts up Superman as that icon.
Yeah, the sigh of relief that you would have the minute he showed up. It was just, again, it's kind of a weird moment because they aren't innocents, and he did kind of get rocked by this ball a couple times before he dealt with it. But when he just reaches out and claps it to dust, I was just like, yeah, man, that is the entire point of Superman right there in that moment. Is very good. And it's worth pointing out, saving people continues to be a big thing going on in this episode.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, and that's, again, the thing about Superman, is he actually, despite what some certain Zack Snyder movies may portray, Superman actually, he likes to save people. That's what he does. I think that the animated series does a great job at showing how he's simultaneously trying to stop the bad guy, but not without also saving the civilians. I mean, and the thing I like is generally 9 times out of 10, we see him pick the civilians, right? One time out of 10, it's more like he has to stop and think about it before he saves the civilians. And
that's usually when the villain's putting him in a spot, right? When the villain's like, you can have me or you can have the people. And he stops and thinks for a minute and then is like, this is easy. I got to save the people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so again, highlighting, differences between Batman and Superman a little bit and what makes Superman great.
And he even does it as Clark, because I loved that Clark actually saves Mannheim, not Superman.
Oh, yeah. No, that was a clever subversion from what we might expect.
Yeah, it's just your secret identity is in danger. Mannheim is a bad man and you know it, but you're still going to put yourself in a certain kind of harm's way, in order to save Mannheim. That's a very Superman move. And the fact that he kind of does it again in that same scene with the heat vision is very cool. I like that. And we actually see Lois save or attempt to save 3 different people in this episode. So she is damseled, but Lois remains a heroic character in her own right, in her own way.
And again, to circle back on that trope piece, she is damsel, but the thing is about her, she's never helpless either.
It's true. It's true. And that can, I mean, again, the damseling is still too much. But if you can keep her not helpless even while you're damseling her, it definitely, at least for me, mitigates the problem.
So Joshua, we want to circle back and let's talk about maybe Toyman a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just kind of in the context of this episode, he is voiced by Bud Cort, captures Lois Lane, which he uses as a vehicle to kind of tell his origin story, where he reveals basically his father was working for Mannheim and then gets framed and is put in jail while when Toyman is having to grow up on his own, left to his own devices. The line that really stuck out to me is he says, a childhood is a terrible thing to lose, Ms. Lane.
Yeah.
And taking mine back with a vengeance. Oof. Yeah. Creepy. I mean, again, there is a hint of sympathy there. You're like, man, you got screwed, and that really is a tragedy. But also the vengeance side is like, man, this guy is creepy. Just the way he's dressed like a child. He's kind of projecting that on everything around him.
I felt like they were kind of doing a Mr. Freeze redux because looking at the comic book Toyman, there's not a lot of background for him for a long time. Like, he pretty much shows up, is the gimmick. He just comes from an era when character-driven stuff was less important to comic book stories, to superhero comics especially. And for them to show up and give him some pathos really felt like a Heart of Ice moment. But at the same time, they don't put the same level of effort into it that they do for Mr. Freeze. So it's like low rent Mr. Freeze redux.
It's like they've established the methodology and they're going through the motions a little bit, Yeah,
we checked the box now. It's a little less artistic. It still gets us where we're going. And I will say they gain points with me for giving the origin by cutting back and forth between the very sort of dry Clark and Jimmy finding things in the archives and the very weird and, again, off-putting because of the context pop-up book. Yes. How long did he spend memorializing his pain? Right. Yeah.
But, I mean, like, at creating storybooks, building a giant playhouse in a warehouse. I mean, yeah, it's it's eerie. And I think it does feel like a little bit out of Gotham, but I think he's a compelling enough villain in this story, and they give him enough to leave me wanting more. Now, I don't know if you want to touch a little more on the comic origins, Joshua, but as far as like all other media, this guy has popped up in basically every version of Superman you've heard of in some form or another. He was in Super Friends back in the 70s. Of course, we see him here, and we'll see him in the future of the DCAU. He makes a really short cameo appearance in the Batman. He is in Batman Brave and the Bold. Pops up as an incredibly creepy, very pedophile-ish version of himself in Superman Doomsday, the animated movie back in 2008. And then we also have a very strange iteration that pops up in Smallville as well. I gotta say,
that's right. I had forgotten that. I'll tell you why. It's because he has an obvious hook of a gimmick. He doesn't have much else going on. That's why they have to give him this, very pathos-filled backstory. He maybe shouldn't always be the kind of guy that can threaten Superman, but nevertheless, we know what to do for exactly 22 to 44 minutes with a guy called the Toyman. Right. We can do that. And so they do.
The Smallville version, he doesn't pop up until the later season. It's for a few episodes. Would you say this is about as good as it gets? I mean, in terms of Toyman and the versions that you're familiar with?
Honestly, yes. He's either completely goofy and ineffectual. Let me take a step back, actually, because I was about to talk about Winslow Schott version of Toyman, which is who this is, right? That version of Toyman in the comics is usually a cipher, like he doesn't really have a lot of background and is goofy, like is almost comic relief. That's kind of what you get in the Super Friends also, which admittedly is a show skewed, much younger. I believe it was only for one episode, but I did like the version of Toyman that showed up on Supergirl. He has a connection to one of her regular characters. He is the father of one of her friends. And so I really liked the one episode that I saw that used him on that show also. But for my money, this is probably the best one. He's super creepy. He suggests creepier things without drawing those into this more childlike show, and does manage to threaten Superman, which is cool. So yeah, I think this is probably as good as it gets.
All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good to hear. And, as the episode winds down, we do get that sort of a cliffhanger ending, sort of a cliffhanger, not as in like, oh my gosh, we're going to pick this up next week, but like Toyman's still out there sort of thing going on.
Yes.
I feel like this is an easy way that they almost immediately distinguish the difference between the original BTAS and Superman. Generally, original BTAS didn't do stuff like this. It felt very self-contained. And while this is self-contained, it does kind of leave that open, like, oh, the Toyman's going to come back again, for another Night of Terror or something of that effect. Did you like this ending?
I did. You know me. I am here for the tropiest of tropey stuff, and no body means not dead, but also finding the mask or a playing card or a calling card of the supposedly dead character broken or with a hole through it or, whatever is a great way to say this story is definitely over, but we will see him again. Like it's a really good move in a genre that requires closure, but also requires that we leave the future open to see these characters again.
Right. Like this is going to be an ongoing battle with Toyman. I completely agree. The other question I want to ask you about this particular episode is, did you not think this was a bit of a strange choice for the first post-pilot episode?
It really was. It reminded me of another BTAS conversation we've had. It felt like Man-Bat.
Yeah.
Like, it's a weird choice, but it also largely works.
Yeah. I think for me, it establishes a status quo bad guy of the week sort of vibe.
Sure.
So obviously, in the last episode, we saw Lex Luthor's going to be an ongoing bad guy. We know that Brainiac's still out there in some capacity. He's going to be like a long-running, ongoing bad guy. This felt like kind of like in the 90s, especially a very popular like monster or bad guy of the week sort of thing. So I guess in my mind, this sort of establishes what audiences will be able to expect from an average episode.
That's a good point. And it's a worthwhile thing to make sure that your viewing audience knows. Because again, we've discussed how the biggest difference, even more so than the look most of the time, between BTAS and Superman and the New Adventures of Batman is that Superman and the New Adventures of Batman really zero in on their action adventure tropes. They really want it to feel like an action adventure show, whereas sometimes we just took little weird detours in BTAS,
Yeah, definitely. It felt very noir, hard-boiled, or something else entirely.
I mean, you are going to just buckle up, listeners. You're going to hear Caleb and I ask, who is this made for 0 times?
No, it's very clear. This is very clear. This show and the new Batman adventures are very clear. This is targeted towards a more family, child-like demographic versus BTAS, which technically was for kids, but you're watching some of those episodes saying, oh, there's no way kids would get this.
Yeah, it's not inappropriate, but it's also not for them. Whereas here we can say definitively, we are aiming at children ages 8 to 13 all the time. We got them. So
Definitely. Well, you have anything else you want to add, Joshua?
Yes. Let's ask a question that we didn't ask about our last couple. Would you consider this a must-watch Superman episode?
Joshua, I'm glad you mentioned that because the last couple episodes were kind of givens. You kind of have to watch those.
Right, yeah. I would even say that about Holiday Nights, actually, because it does kind of like take us on a tour of Gotham and let us see some different characters and stuff. You could probably skip it and be fine, but it's a good watch. Let's ask that about Toyman, though. What do you think?
Yes, because we get introduced to Toyman, who I know will be not a major ongoing character, but will be a character who shows up frequently in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And if not, for nothing else, seeing that short little villain origin story, I think works pretty well. So essential, probably not. I would say like sub-essential. Like if I was giving someone a list of the episodes of Superman animated series they have to watch, this would probably not be among them. That said, if I said, if you have time, catch these also, this would probably be on that list.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm not sure that I would go so far as to say essential, but it's a very enjoyable, 22 minutes of television. And in fact, we're going to talk about all of the episodes of New Batman Adventures and Superman the Animated Series because there are so many less than there were of BTAS, and there's a little more variance in quality, as opposed to BTAS where it was like, well, this is another great one if we had done all of them, But I think that this is going to be like a lot of the episodes where we say it's not essential, but it's super fun and there's no reason you should skip it.
Right. All right, Joshua. Well, as always, we like to close out with alternate media recommendations. So if you had to recommend to our listeners something they should watch, play, or read before our next episode, what would you recommend?
I can suggest both a reading and a watching experience. My son is just about the right age. He's just about outgrowing R.L. Stine's Goosebumps. But he has been reading them religiously for years. And then he discovered that the 90s Goosebumps television show is available on Netflix. So he has been reading and watching them. One of the recurring villains in R.L. Stine's Goosebumps is a supernaturally animated evil ventriloquist dummy named Slappy. I mean, he's got at least 3 or 4 books about him and at least 2 or 3 episodes of the show. And he actually has a very similar look to Toyman. If you're wondering what toy Toyman is supposed to be emulating, it's a ventriloquist dummy. So I think if you find that kind of thing creepy, but working at this kind of more childlike level, you might want to take a look at Day of the Dummy, Night of the Living Dummy. So many Slappy stories. I think he's actually the ringleader, like the mastermind of all of the villainous monsters in the Goosebumps movie as well. So
that is correct. The one with Jack Black.
He's pretty creepy.
Yep. Well, Joshua, I just have a couple of quick recommendations. Really, I'll streamline it to one because I got to save some of these for future Toyman episodes.
Haha, that's a good thought. Do not go full out because we get some more of them and he's kind of a weird niche, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going to start with the 1998 classic, Small Soldiers. Is this movie good? Probably not. Do I enjoy the heck out of it? Absolutely, I do. And it's just about some toys who have AI programmed into them and become self-aware enough to know what they're doing, but also still think they're actually soldiers. So it's quite humorous, probably terrible, but I could not let this opportunity to recommend the movie pass it by. So that's 1998's Small Soldiers.
Well, again, if we're talking about the age group that Superman the Animated Series is purposefully aimed at, which clearly does not stop us from enjoying it, but it's not aimed at us either. If we're looking at the age group it's actually aimed at, Small Soldiers probably stands up for those kids.
I think so.
Let your kids watch it. Go nuts.
It was very edgy when it came out, and I was under the age of 12. Yes, it's good stuff.
That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk, and I am at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is Animated Discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, people can always find me. I'm the editor-in-chief and contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique. We also have a monthly podcast called The Cinematic Schematic. We publish in-depth essays and the podcast over on thecinematropolis.com.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
The links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, and our recommendations and Twitter are easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us for an animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about the new Batman Adventures, discussing Sins of the Father.
Until next time, look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's an animated discussion.